What are some of the most horrifying creepy campfire or real-life stories you've ever heard? I went to Girl Scout camp every summer until I was 12 or 13. Every year older girls would tell the story of the Girl Scout murders. It usually went that some crazy person dragged 2 or 3 girls out of their tent in the middle of the night and brutally murdered them. They weren't found until the next morning and they had never caught who did it. That story used to scare the shit out of me. One day, I was browsing some unsolved mysteries and came across the Girl Scout murders. Turns out that story was fucking true. There was one I heard a while ago and I think Mr. Nightmare covered it on YouTube, that involved a father and his kid hunting in the woods. After a while the father realized they were being watched by a man who would occasionally pop his head out from behind a tree to look at them. The father and son moved to different spots about 3 times and the man was still watching them from behind a nearby tree every time. Eventually the father walked the kid to their car and then went to face the man to see what his problem was. When he went to the last tree he saw the man and he found a disembodied head. Turns out there was a serial killer on the loose luring campers to their deaths with decapitated heads. The police said the man probably only escaped with his life because the assailant clicked on that he was armed. That shit fucked me up first time I heard about it. My grandpa used to tell a story every time we went camping about this thing called the hill crawler. Basically, it was a human creature thing that had one normal-sized leg and then one super long, crooked leg so it could walk around the circumference of steep hills with no struggle. Almost in a splits-like position. I didn't think much of it as a kid but now that I'm older it kinda scares the shit out of me. This one was told to me by a friend the night before I was to babysit alone for the first time. This girl was babysitting one night, the parents were out on a date night. The baby was in bed and she started to hear something from the basement. So she went downstairs and looked in the window and saw a man standing outside with a bloody knife. She ran upstairs as quick as she could grab the baby and ran to the neighbor's house and called the police. Later that night when talking with the police she was telling them of the man she saw in the basement window. The mother overheard her story and said there are no windows in the mirrors. To this day I hate babysitting alone. I heard that when I was 14, I am now 21 and it still gives me the heebies. Heard this from a friend and I don't know how true it is but it gives me shivers to this day. His aunt had come home from grocery shopping one day and was putting the food in the fridge when she heard the washing machine start. Knowing she hadn't started the machine but hesitant nonetheless, she walked to the basement door and put her hand on the knob. Something felt seriously wrong. She called 911 and the police roll up to the house, enter, and head down to the basement. Minutes later, they return with a man in handcuffs who had been waiting with a knife. This story is probably the only way I can still justify checking behind the shower curtain when I'm home alone. Well, I made a mistake coming in here before sleeping. Not really a campfire story but a military camp story that's been going around for ages. So this batch of new recruits are a week into their enlistment. This one guy wants to win the Best Recruit award and is trying his best to shine at every opportunity possible. Bootlicking included. So it was past midnight in the wee hours of the morning, and the recruit is somehow awoken from his sleep. His bed is right next to the window. He begins to hear footsteps coming from outside the window, drawing nearer. He sees an older man in uniform walk past his window, a face he has never seen before. Assuming it was the duty officer making his rounds in camp, in his grogginess but still wanting to look good in front of all commanders, he sits up and greets the man, "Good morning, sir." The officer stops in his tracks, turns around, looks at him and says, "Good morning, soldier. It's still early, go back to sleep." The recruit smiles and says thank you sir and lies back down to sleep. Only at that moment did the recruit realize something. His bed is beside a window, and his bunk is on the 4th floor. There's no way a man could be walking outside the window, 4 stories up, in midair. Who exactly was the man outside his window? I've got more bunk horror stories if you're interested. I keep lurking but no one has posted anything. Tell me your scary stories, please. My dad is a science teacher and he once told me a story about a camping trip he took with some 7th graders. One morning, 2 tents reported to him that they saw a creature digging through a trash can the night before. My dad checked the trash and found that some hot dogs had been eaten. Even though the adults thought it was a bear, the locals joked with the kids and told them it was Mothman. My dad told me this story and also mentioned that the students on the trip had emailed him so many pictures that he hadn't looked at all of them yet. A few weeks later, my dad's computer was asleep and was playing a slideshow. It started showing pictures of the students on their camping trip, marshmallows, swimming, etc. All of a sudden, one photo came up that showed a 4-foot-tall ape-like creature with glowing yellow eyes baring its teeth at a group of teens poking their heads out of a tent. I didn't realize it at first, but I saw later that it was taken at the same as the camping trip where the kids saw Mothman. When I told my dad about it, he said he hadn't seen that picture before and thought it was a bear, but I knew what I saw. His computer crashed soon after that, so he never got a chance to see all the pictures and explain to me what the ape thing was. Even so, thinking about that glowing-eyed beast still sends shivers down my spine a decade later. Someone once told me it's frightening how much topsoil we're losing each year, but when I told that story around the campfire nobody got scared. I'm a scout leader in Australia. I've started telling a shortened version of the Goatman story around the campfire. Mysterious noises reported by one scout when they go away from the campfire to the toilet, an extra body showing up in the frequent head counts, and a shadowy figure seen by me and another scout leader, slowly moving among the sleeping scouts around the fire. Surprisingly, I haven't given them nightmares yet. I remember a story that was told to me that was scary at first, but it became more of a guardian angel kind of story towards the end. It was about a wild cat that was hunting for mice to feed himself, but then strange radiation from outer space came down to him and turned him into a super, invincible cat. Then a big rig ran him down with a hideous splat. He couldn't be killed, but still could be squished, and he lied in the passing lane shaking his fist. Then some kids came by and threw him like a frisbee and he flew away. He flew after the truck like a buzzsaw unleashed, and he sliced it in two like a knife through a peach. One half took the high road, the other below, and a message went out on CB radio. Breaker, breaker, watch your back, be afraid there's a frisbee-like cat who's a mighty sharp blade, so his feared and revered reputation was made. This teenage girl was asked to babysit for a couple while they went out on a date. She had just put the baby to sleep and it's around like 9 or 10 p.m. and the babysitter decides to go upstairs to watch TV. On the chair in the corner of the room is a clown mannequin sitting down. Being creeped out by it, she decided to text the homeowners and asked if she could move it to the closet. The homeowners texted back saying, "We don't have a clown." So the babysitter walks towards it and sees it's breathing. She runs downstairs to the baby's room and dials 911. Turns out some guy had escaped from a psychiatric hospital a few days before and hadn't been found yet. He snuck through the master bedroom balcony thinking it was his mom's house and wanted to surprise her because his mother had taken him to the circus as a child. I was a head counselor and organizer one year for a leadership development camp. We had a meeting a few months before the actual camp, and the sponsors and adults told us not to mention cabin 1. Essentially 2 6-year-old girls were murdered in that cabin. It wasn't because it wasn't true, it was because they didn't want us to scare anyone. So naturally I tell it anyways to shut my cabin up. There was once a fridge filled with food, but it was all vegan. I should not have come here to relax before bed. When I was about 11, my dad leased a ranch in South Texas where we would hunt. One night the owner of the ranch came over and told us the story of the original landowner. Story is about a young couple who lived out on the ranch. The man was of course a farmer and a cowboy, and the wife was a stay-at-home mom. However, one night he went to his neighbor's ranch to catch a few drinks, and when he got back to his house he discovered that his wife was laying with another man. He was infuriated and he ended up killing the man and threw him down the water well. His wife begged for forgiveness, but he threw her down as well without killing her. Every night she would cry for forgiveness until she eventually passed. I was never able to spend the night after that, being that we would set camp up about 20 yards away from the water well and barn owls would nest in there screeching through the night. Not campfire but the Snowtown murders. Barrel murders in Australia were pretty fucking horrendous in my mind. Have you ever heard of the slinging slasher? I have serious doubts about this, but it's still super creepy. One of my friends in college dated a guy who knew a deputy sheriff. The story goes that the deputy was dispatched to an accident one night that occurred just seconds away from where he was. When he got there, he found that one of the drivers had been decapitated. As he looked at the severed head, the lips started moving and it spoke to him for a few seconds before becoming lifeless. Take it however you want, but that story kept me up for a week. My brother once had a job laying footpaths in the Highlands of Scotland. It was tough work, but his crew were good guys. They all lived near the work site on an old cottage, eating and sleeping together. Their place was really remote and the nearest house was a couple of miles away. One night they'd all had dinner. They'd sent one of the guys on the long drive to the nearest shop for a beer. They were just sitting around talking shit. It was dark outside. After a while they heard an engine and headlights showed on the curtains. They waited but no one came. Then out of the dark there was a horrible scream. Everyone in the room froze. The scream went on and on for about 15 seconds, not an animal, the screams of someone in excruciating pain. The guys in that house were big tough boys, well used to working risky jobs in isolation. But none of them had the courage to go and see what was making that noise. When the beer arrived they all drank themselves unconscious. The next day they looked and only found tire tracks. None of them spoke about it after that. No one wants to know something horrible happened and they were too afraid to act.